The test is in 4 parts: Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
1. You are going to hear a conversation taking place in the airport. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. Now listen to the tape and answer the questions.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Northwest Airlines. How can I help you today?
I'd like to check in for the 2 o'clock flight to Nairobi.
Okay. Oh, that flight has been moved back to 2:45. Nothing major, just a weather delay that the plane experienced in Casablanca. May I have your name, please?
Sure. It's Jim Harkness.
Is that Harkness with 2 S's?
Yep. And that's Jim with 1 M.
Got it. Oh, I see you're connecting from Beijing. You sure are getting around.
Yeah. I'm the director of the Worldwide Fund for Nature in Beijing. I'm going to Nairobi for a conference on conservation planning.
Fascinating. Will you have any luggage to check in?
Yes, 1 bag, 1 carry-on, and 1 laptop.
Fine. Put the bag on the scale, please. We are going to fill out customs forms before departure. Can I ask about the contents of your check-in bag?
Sure. It's clothing, personal effects, some gifts, and a few books.
Thanks. What seating would you prefer, aisle or window?
I'd like a window seat, 3 rows back from those large TV screens if possible.
Let me see here. We have 1 4 rows back. Is that okay?
Yeah, I just hate being right in front of those screens. Then I have to watch every dumb movie that comes on.
Now look at questions 8 to 10. As the talk continues, answer questions 8 to 10.
I understand. Is that your carry-on?
Yes, I bought it in India last year.
It sure is a nice bag. Unfortunately, I think it's too big for the overhead storage compartment. Maximum dimensions for carry-on baggage is 16 inches wide by 10 inches high by 21 inches long.
Oh, well, it's okay with width and length, but it's 12 inches high. Are you sure that it won't fit? I've squeezed it in before.
No, I'm sorry. You'll have to check it in with an agent prior to boarding.
All right, it's no big deal.
One final thing. Do you have any DVDs that you purchased in China?
Yes, I have my own music CDs.
Okay, that's fine. We're not allowed to transport DVDs. We're working on controlling copyright regulations imposed by WTO.
Sure, I understand. Is that everything?
Yes, it is. You have a wonderful flight now.
Thank you.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2.
Part 2. You are going to listen to a radio program about buying a house. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15. Good afternoon, listeners. Today, I'd like to welcome Edward Fox, who is going to talk to us today about buying a house. Edward.
Thank you, Eunice. For most people, at least, buying a house is a major life event, and probably the single most expensive item you are ever likely to buy. It is also a place that you can make your home. Therefore, thinking carefully before you make a purchase is of the utmost importance. One of the most important things to consider before buying any property is the location, because remember, it is where you plan to spend a large part of your life, or indeed the rest of your life in some circumstances. Therefore, consider the type of life you enjoy leading. Are you a very sociable person who enjoys nightclubs and discos? If so, then you may wish to consider something close to the city, or indeed in a city where it is convenient for all types of nightlife. On the other hand, if, like me, you prefer a quieter life, then you may want to consider something away from the city. However, do remember that proximity to your place of work is also important. Indeed, we spend most of our life at work, and you don't want to have to spend 2 or more hours every day travelling to work now, do you? Therefore, transport is the utmost importance. City suburbs, however, are often conveniently located for commuting to work,
All for shopping.
without being in the heart of a busy city. You may, however, think that a house in the suburbs would be far too expensive. Yet houses located in cities can often exceed the price of suburban houses. So check out the prices. You may be surprised. Family is another important consideration. You may prefer a house that is away from a busy street or main road. And of course, remember that children have to attend school. Is there a good school in the area, or would your children have to travel a long distance to get to school? Therefore, if you have children, or you plan to have children, location is a very important factor. And of course, remember that a family influences the size of the property.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
And of course, remember that a family influences the size of the property. There are, of course, various types of houses. There are detached houses which stand alone and are not joined by to another building. Then there are semi-detached houses, which, incidentally, are the most common, and for good reason, because they are less expensive than detached houses. This is because they are, in fact, 2 houses joined together, and therefore take up less space. And finally, there are townhouses, which are many houses joined together to form a long row. But don't think that townhouses are less expensive than semi-detached houses. They rarely are. This is because they are usually built in cities where the prices of property is very expensive indeed. The age of property is another consideration. If you're considering buying an old house, beware. You may be faced with expensive repairs and renovation bills. So have the house thoroughly checked by a professional surveyor before you decide to buy. But then again, there are things you can look for yourself. Things such as the condition of the woodwork, especially doors and windows that can be expensive to replace. More importantly, make sure all the fixtures and fittings, things such as cupboards, sinks, taps, bathtubs, are all in good working order, because replacing kitchens and bathrooms can be a very costly business. And don't forget the garden. If the property has one, if you enjoy gardening, then fine. But if you don't enjoy gardening, then you may prefer a small garden as opposed to a big one. But even if you do enjoy gardening, it is important to remember that gardens take up a lot of your time. So keeping a garden in good order may be very difficult if you work long hours. One final thing is the general feel of the place. Does it have a good atmosphere? And most importantly of all, would you feel comfortable living there?
Thank you, Edward. But I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. But I'll be back next Wednesday when my guest speaker will be talking about buying a computer. So, until then, bye for now.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a discussion between a professor and university students about online learning. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Good afternoon, everybody. As part of our education studies, we're going to continue our look at online learning and examine what it takes to be successful in this area. Perhaps I should start by asking you to answer the question. Yes, Edward?
Well, I guess one of the most important things for successful study would be discipline. I mean, you don't have to physically be in a class, so you'd have to really make sure you did your coursework.
Yes, this is correct. In fact, my first point relates directly to this. Make sure you regularly plan enough study and assignment time. I separate the two because although they relate, they're not exactly the same. With study time, you're focusing on general information as you plan for tests, but with assignments, you might be focusing on presenting more specific information. What else? Yes, Sylvia.
Well, it seems to me that before you even start studying, you should make a well-informed and carefully planned decision about which university you're going to study at.
Yes, I was going to say that too. It's important to work out where you're going to study first. And another thing you should consider is your career objective. Your course of study should relate to your job.
Absolutely correct. Once you've worked out where you want to study. Another thing to consider is your attitude towards study. You should build a positive attitude, take responsibility for your learning. Unlike regular classroom learning, no one will be there to stand over you and make sure that you do the work. As with regular learning, it's also important that you work hard in your own time to build your written and spoken language proficiency, as well as your ability to improve your analytical and logical reasoning. You should develop research skills which allow you to make the best use of your time. If you see something that might be helpful for an assignment, make a note of it.
What about note-taking skills? Would an online learner need well-developed skills in this area?
Good point, Pam. Lectures conducted online or via telephone will certainly require you to have good note-taking skills. Sometimes a copy of the lecture notes are available, but certainly you need to be able to take notes and write essays. They relate to your assignments. Another point often not considered is physical health. We all understand that physical health relates to mental health. Take care of your body by doing exercise and eating well, and you'll do better in your studies. My last point is simply to enjoy the experience. Learning should be fun. If you've put in the time to decide upon the best course for you, then enjoy yourself. Those who enjoy their course of study are those who will typically do well. So students should choose their course well.
Before you listen to the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen carefully and answer questions 28 to 30.
I'd now like to discuss the assignment for this part of our coursework. Firstly, the assignment is due in 3 weeks. I've reserved information for you at the library. Speak to Carol and tell her you're in the education class. She'll allow you access to the materials I've reserved.
Professor, can we borrow them from the library?
Some of them can be borrowed, but only overnight because other students may need to have access to them. You'll have to complete an overnight sign-out form.
What about the length of the assignment?
No less than 1,500 words, and please, no more than 2,000.
What about the format?
I want that double-spaced and in Arial 12-point font. If you have any other questions, remember to either call my office or you might like to email me. My email address is...
That is the end of Part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a talk about the pitfalls and pleasures of being a postgraduate student. Look at questions 32 to 37.
Postgraduates are about as easy to define as catching steam in a bucket. Courses can be vocational, for training, as research, as a preparation for research, or a combination of these. Also, you can choose between full-time and part-time. Increasingly, the approach to postgraduate study is becoming modular. The vast majority of postgraduates are doing short, taught courses, many of which provide specific vocational training. Indeed, there has been a 400% increase in postgraduate numbers in Britain over the past 20 years. Current figures stand at just under 400,000. People undertake postgraduate study for many reasons. These may be academic, intellectual challenge, development of knowledge; vocational, training for a specific career goal; or only vague, drifting into further study. It is essential that you determine the reasons you want to become a postgraduate. If you have clear goals and reasons for studying, this will enhance your learning experience and help you to remain focused and motivated throughout your course. Where you study should be based on much more than the course you want to do. For some courses, you're likely to be there for several years, and it is important that you are happy living there. Check also what type of accommodation is available and whether the institution provides any housing specifically for postgraduates. Choosing an institution and department is a difficult process. To determine quality, do not rely on the reputation of an institution, but find out what the ratings are from the most recent assessment exercises. Find out about the staff, their reputation, competence, enthusiasm, and friendliness. Visit the department if possible, and talk to existing postgraduates about their experience, satisfaction, comments, and complaints. Be very careful to check how they feel about their supervisors. Also, check what facilities are available, both at an institutional level, for example libraries, laboratory and computing facilities, and in the department, for example study room, desk, photocopying, secretarial support, etc. Everyone will have their own priorities here. I am always anxious to check the computer support available and regard it as slightly more important than library access. Your working environment and the support available to you plays an essential part in making your work as a postgraduate a positive experience. Life as a postgraduate can be very different to your other experiences of education. Things that can distinguish your experience are the level of study, independence of working, intensity of the course, the demands on your time, and often the fact that you're older than the majority of students. These factors can contribute to making you feel isolated. However, there are several ways you can make sure that this is either short-lived or does not happen at all. Many student unions have postgraduate societies that organise social events and may also provide representation for postgraduates to both the student union and the institution. Departments can also help to create a sense of identity and community, and often have discussion groups available. Don't be afraid to talk to staff about any difficulties you might be having. Of course, universities provide counselling services, but we have found that the best advice comes from talking to other postgraduates who may have faced similar difficulties.
Look at questions 38 to 40.
Financial planning is essential, since the government excludes postgraduates from student loans, and it can be difficult to maintain your student status with banks. This has implications for free banking and overdraft facilities. Do not underestimate your living costs, including food, accommodation and travel. And be careful not to budget for everything except a social life. Funding a course is one of the most challenging things people face when considering postgraduate study. Most postgraduate students finance themselves. They pay often very large fees to the institution and receive no maintenance income to support their study. Make sure you know exactly what your costs will be. Institutions often hide extra fees, like laboratory costs, behind the headline fee rate advertised. Funding can come from various sources: research councils, charities, trust funds, institutional scholarships, local education authorities, and professional bodies and organisations all offer various levels of funding. As I said before, the government excludes postgraduates from student loans, so it is essential you look to other sources. Career development loans are available from high street banks. The best advice on funding is to be proactive, persistent and patient. The postgraduate community in Britain is multinational, has a wide range of experience of life and work, and an exciting mix of goals, both career and academic. Being a postgraduate student should be a productive and fulfilling thing to do, and you will become part of a diverse and motivated social group.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.